Mm-hmm.
We're online now.
Mm-hmm.
Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of The Magic Box. I am Tristan Sean Gregson here with Kyle Eck. We are talking Cube, as always. Part of me wants to pick up kind of where we left off last week's conversation with lands. We'll do that a little bit, but we'll also talk about some other topics. We'll wish we had an update for You Make the Card this week.
I know. We're still stuck on color. They wanted everyone to have like a long time to think about this.
I'm surprised this time around. I feel like we're in the majority. Those
Really?
out there on the Twitterverse that are very active, they say go black or go home.
I disagree.
Okay.
I felt that. I mean, I looked into it like a little bit. I checked the hashtags,
Okay.
YMTC and whatnot, and red seemed like it was a very.
It was leading the pack.
At least early on.
Maybe that's the underground one. As where it felt like Enchantment was the underground favorite for 2 weeks ago. Who knows?
The common argument I heard about red was like, well, red only does like two things, but that design constriction is super interesting. So we got to make like a cool red enchantment that still does damage to opponents or destroys lands or artifacts.
When have we ever done a You Make the Card where players were fist pumping constrictions?
I don't know. Like when I looked on Twitter, there was just a bunch of people who were all saying that. And it was just like a very strange thing.
I'm going to have to stay strong. I'm going to think Black's going to take this. Well, obviously, it's hope as well. And, we'll come back next week and we'll work with the new constraints we've been given. But it feels like Black's going to get the job done.
I would hope so.
Let's break right into it. This week we have a sample pack for you as always. And we also have a bonus segment we hope to kind of integrate a little bit more. We're going to go a few picks deep into a draft and then look at a pack and kind of see, well, if you have these things, now how does your pick order change? How do you evaluate cards? But we'll start with the classic 15 cards, pick one, pack one. Let's see what we've got here. Eck, tell them at home what we're looking at.
All right, we are looking at Pernicious Deed, Scroll Rack, Mana Drain, Chandra the Firebrand, Path to Exile, Desecration Demon, Skull Clamp, Rampant Growth, Rishadan Port, Vampire Hexmage, Fire Ice, Snapcaster Mage, Dryad Militant, Thundermaw Hellkite, Twilight Mire.
Okay, I think jumping out at me pretty clearly is Mana Drain, Path to Exile, Skull Clamp, and I guess a distant second tier here is like Snapcaster Mage, Thundermaw Hellkite.
I would put Thundermaw Hellkite on that upper tier. Like, Thundermaw is insane.
Insane?
That said, I mean, this is a very, very powerful pack, but I think it's also one with a very clear first pick in Clamp.
You think Clamp is the clear first pick? Okay. I would say this one's debatable. Thankfully, it's debatable.
It's debatable just because the power level of so many cards is so high. Like, I would not fault anyone for taking Path to Exile first or Mana Drain first. Even Thundermaw Hellkite if they wanted to play red. Thundermaw is like one of the best red creatures. I mean, it's the top end of the curve in like the aggressive red deck. It's awesome in the red control decks that are slower. Like, it's just such a giant haymaker.
Thundermaw Hellkite is great in the regards that it makes it into pretty much any deck with mountains. It doesn't matter if you're playing aggro, control, mid-range, or the non-existent combo.
Yeah.
If you have mountains in your deck, Thundermaw Hellkite is going to be in there. He's going to be good wherever you find a way to cast him. Of course, that doesn't really matter in this set of circumstances. I think that the other three cards in the pack clearly outshine it. And strangely enough to me, I think Path to Exile is actually pulling up the rear of those three cards. Because I think that, for me, if I'm looking at this pack, I'm just kind of making a distinction between whether or not I want to play a creature deck or I want to play a blue deck.
I think that I would, if I were to rank the top four cards in this pack, I would put Skullclamp at first with Path to Exile at second, Mana Drain at third, and Thundermaw at fourth. And the only reason I'm doing that is that there's really no other white in the pack besides Path to Exile. I mean, half of Dryad Militant, and that's it. Whereas Mana Drain is a double blue commitment, and there's a Snapcaster Mage, and Fire Ice, which is going to make its way into a lot of blue decks.
Okay.
I mean, all that being said, I think Skullclamp is still the, like, slam dunk, just because Skullclamp is just so insanely powerful, and it doesn't commit you to a color. Like, you can play Skullclamp in almost any deck. Like, all Skullclamp commits you to is playing creatures. Not even, like, you have to combo it out with a bunch of, like, little guys, or, play tokens to make it crazy. Like, it's just good all the time.
I think this is a product of the cube we play with being a powered cube and being a more diverse cube. But I think there have... let me rephrase that. There have definitely been decks in the history of my cubing where I have taken a Skull Clamp and then not had it in my deck. And maybe that's just a product of me as a drafter. But when I look at the blue cards, I'm thinking, like, the power level of Mana Drain is right there on par with the power level of Skull Clamp in the ability for you to kind of leap ahead in terms of the game. And instead of making that leap ahead in card advantage by drawing out your opponent, you're making that leap ahead in mana earlier in the turns and having a distinct advantage of being able to cast your larger spells. And that's not obviously a slam dunk always with Mana Drain, but the great thing about Mana Drain is, at worst, it's just Counterspell, which is still a very good card in Cube.
There are certainly decks that are not going to want Skull Clamp, and I also think it's possible that you could take Skull Clamp and end up not playing it. That said, once you have Skull Clamp,
you're probably going to take cards that you're going to play it with.
And also, a lot of cards that work well in a deck that can really utilize Skull Clamp are not necessarily going to be high picks. Like, you could easily play an aggressive white deck or white-blue even, and all of a sudden that Dryad Militant on the wheel is very live.
I do like how there are 3 creatures in this pack that are all 2/1s. Mm-hmm. As though the Skull Clamp is calling out to you, like, look, you may have friends later.
Yeah. Skull Clamp is also sweet in blue. You can Trinket Mage for it.
Sure, yes. And then equipping Trinket Mage is very good there. I feel like the card draw is better than the fast mana in most cubes. I think that is a valid statement. Again, if this was the MTGO cube, well, if it was the MTGO cube, it would be a bit of a paradox, because the only time they had Mana Drain was during the Powered Cube season.
Right.
Wherein, if you looked at this pack, you would snap off Mana Drain, or you'd probably just snap off Snapcaster Mage, actually, because it was not a creature-based format. If it was the more traditional MTGO cube, which we see all the time, Mana Drain wouldn't exist. And if you replaced it with Counterspell, then you'd obviously take Skull Clamp, so that's not a very good comparison either. I just think in the cube that we play, there's a great duality there, and this is actually a much closer pick than it would be under almost any other set of circumstances for cubes that I have played with, and that's why it's a great example today. Skull Clamp versus Mana Drain. And I don't know if it comes down to a personal preference or if it comes down to a strictly power level preference, but with my experience, I'm probably taking the Mana Drain here, and X probably taking the Skull Clamp.
I don't think it's necessarily an issue of power level, because you're right in that the top cards in this pack are all relatively close. I think it really comes down to preference. Skull Clamp is going to angle you more towards an aggressive, small guy kind of deck, but doesn't necessarily have to be. Mana Drain's going to angle you to blue, and that's fine. Blue is the best color in the cube, and taking a strong blue card first is never bad. You just play blue. That said, I think Skull Clamp just rewards focusing on that kind of draft archetype better.
Right. Skull Clamp is also safer, just because it's a single mana colorless card, where I'm taking a double blue card.
Yeah.
No matter what comes down the pipe at you directly after this, it won't affect you. I mean, the next pack could have, Videlkin Shackles and Bitter Blossom in it, and I'd probably still be happier to have a Bitter Blossom with a Skull Clamp than I would to have a Mana Drain with a Videlkin Shackles. I definitely think Skull Clamp is safer there, and for more newer to cube players, I don't think there's any argument between taking Skull Clamp. But, again, if I sat down at a cube that I didn't know and had this decision, I can't see not taking Skull Clamp because I don't know what I'm going to see.
Right.
Mana Drain could be an outlier for a particular cube's blue section. It could not have that much counter magic or control support. It couldn't have that many wrath effects. You don't know.
That being said, it's also necessarily it's worth saying that if you know that blue is very good, or that you want to play blue, or you have some kind of read on the people around you, like you're going to get past a lot of blue. Like, say the guys tier immediate right don't want to play, they don't like blue, they don't want to play blue, they want to play an aggressive deck most often than not. Taking Mana Drain gets better because you can assume that you're going to get shipped more blue options.
Right. I mean, in a draft where Sam is on your right and I'm on your left, and you open this pack,
yeah,
you can take Mana Drain, and then would I ship Skull Clamp again? Let's say I took Upheaval.
There's no way you ship Skull Clamp again.
Even if I first picked Upheaval?
Upheaval into Skull Clamp.
I'd probably take Path to Exile after I took Upheaval.
I mean, Skull Clamp is just Skullclamp is one of the least fair cards for like the got creature matchups as well as the control matchups. It just is so hard to overcome that advantage.
Yep. I mean, the writing's on the wall. Pay 1, draw 2 cards. So this one kind of comes down to, again, know your cube, know your draft area, or know what you want to do in your environment. So with that, I don't fault anyone on taking Skullclamp or Drain here. I would definitely fault you for taking any card that wasn't those two or maybe Path to Exile. I would wonder what your motivation was. So, I think it's also important at this time to point out what the phrase of the day for you playing the drinking game at home is. Anytime either one of us says, "That being said," that's your cue to drink.
So which is a good game to have at 3:45 p.m. West Coast time.
That's West Coast time. East Coast time, happy hour is just finishing up.
That's true.
You could order a couple rounds before, get ready to go, because you're watching this in a bar or something, I'm sure.
Yeah, of course. So I think let's go into our bonus second pack.
Let's preface this a little bit more. So we're talking about circumstances where it's not just pick one, pack one. And let's say, for example, we saw a 14-card pack that didn't have a mana drain in it, and we took an upheaval. Then how does our card evaluation change? How does the pick order change? Which is one of the great things about Cube that I wish we could go into every week very easily. So this week we're going to take a stab at it. We'll see how things kind of develop from there. But here we're going to look at a situation where you're getting past 11 cards. You've got 4 picks in the draft, and we'll evaluate from there.
Okay, so in this draft so far, this is still pack 1. In order, you have taken the following cards: Oblivion Ring, Vindicate, Wrath of God, and Mind Stone. So you've got some white control cards.
It looks like we took an Oblivion Ring purely on power level, Vindicate purely on power level. A Wrath of God probably works well with the white we already have access to, and we got a nice ramp artifact there to kind of make sure that we hit our stuff, which makes me think we're leaning a little bit more towards control. We don't have a creature yet. We have a kill. We have a sweeper. And now we get past a pack with 11 cards, and what are we looking at?
So this pack, we are now looking at Caracas, Siege Gang Commander, Forbidden Alchemy, Sunlance, Scroll Rack, Lightning Helix, Necropotence, Molten Steel Dragon, Gravecrawler, Naturalize, and Deadbridge Goliath. So this is a pretty disappointing pack if you have a bunch of white control cards.
Okay, well, I don't think it's that bad.
It's not that bad, but it's pretty underwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, I have a scroll rack problem, I feel like.
You do have a scroll rack problem.
I think in a lot of white control decks, I'm really keen to take a scroll rack. It's a great way to get card advantage and virtual card draw out of a color that doesn't have that kind of card draw. And now once I take scroll rack, I'm really aggressively looking for fetch lands as a way to kind of get that back. In the same way that, if you had a Divining Top in your deck.
Sure.
That,
I am
throwing that thought out there. I'm not committing to that. I'm just thinking that's one angle from this to come at. What do you think? What jumps out at you here?
Well, it's interesting because the obvious card to take would be Sunlance, because you're a white control deck, you're looking for removal, but I feel like you already have 2 targeted removal spells and a sweeper. Sunlance is not necessarily going to... Sunlance is a very low tier white removal spell compared to a lot of the other ones, and even ones that you already have.
Sunlance is one of those cards that the amount you've cube drafted, it really often says, pick me 9th or higher, or, 9th or later.
Yeah. I definitely... You may even see this card on the wheel out of this pack.
Sunlance?
It's very possible.
Oh, very, very probably. I mean, you still have... Molten Steel Dragon does not have a color identity, so that card's going to be gone. Scroll Rack also doesn't have a color identity.
Siege Gang, Lightning Helix.
So the last 3 cards that are probably going to be in this pack are going to be some combination of Gravecrawler, Sunlance, and either Caracas, Helix, or Naturalize, depending on how things break down. I think the more experienced players are going to take the Lightning Helix and find a way to play it, even if they haven't found Boros color combinations.
So one way you could go with this is to just take Caracas. You don't have any creatures yet, but now all of a sudden you have a interesting interaction with potential legends that could show up. Obviously, you keep your eyes peeled for Mangara of Karandor for the blowouts, but any other stuff, it can be useful. I think that Forbidden Alchemy is also fine. I'm kind of looking to go maybe some sort of Esprit, maybe just with a little bit of black, for maybe Vindicate, Forbidden Alchemy, and nothing else. Or, potentially on the other side, you're white-black with a little bit of blue. So you played just the front side of Forbidden Alchemy as a splash, but you have the back side on easier to cast. I think something like Necro, well, you can argue, like, oh, you have the white-black card, you're playing a control deck, Necro fits that. I don't like taking Necro that early. Like, triple black is just an insane commitment, and, that Vindicate may just be a splash. It may be nothing.
Well, I think within the same breath, you have both recognized and dismissed the fact that we aren't necessarily playing black, and I think that's really what's important to point out between these four cards is, Vindicate is clearly a powerful card, but you could just not end up playing it in your deck at this point in the draft, or you could end up kind of reevaluating fixing it at some point down the line. Yeah. So I'm looking at cards like Lightning Helix and Forbidden Alchemy as being clearly cards I can take here and be very excited about. Because, yeah, I could play Blue-White Control and just happen to find a way to get a black source in my deck for things like Vindicate, the other half Forbidden Alchemy, a Dromar's Charm, a Sphinx of the Steel one that may come down the road. But I look at that as the only blue card in the pack, being like, okay, well, I have an O-Ring, a Mind Stone, a Wrath of God, and now an Impulse. Like, I'm kind of heading towards a Blue-White Control deck. That sounds really great. I can also look at Lightning Helix. If I take Lightning Helix, that opens up a myriad of options. Because now I have a great card that goes into Black-White Control with Vindicate. I have a great card that goes into Boros with Lightning Helix. I have two really key white cards for any kind of white control deck, and I have a mana accelerant. So now when I get past Gargadon, Thundermaw, Hellkite, Baneslayer Angel, even that Siege Gang Commander wheeling potentially with the Lightning Helix in your pool.
That would be a miracle on 34th Street.
It could happen. It's not outside the realm of possibility.
Right.
All of a sudden, you take Siege Gang Commander on the wheel, and you open up Rebel Arc, and you have a Boat Brew deck or something.
The other seven drafters you're with all had strokes, and that's how you get Siege Gang back.
It's not that bad.
But I do agree with you in that Lightning Helix is a fine pick here. I think that even if you're just base white with you're lightly touching on a couple other colors for spells, kind of casually picking up mana fixing. A lot of times, what I'll do when I'm drafting, especially if I have like a number of picks in one color, but no real strong reason to have a second color yet, right? Like, say that we, instead of having Vindicate, we just had another white card, right? And we had like, going forward, you're taking white cards, but then like anytime, even if I don't have cards for it, I will take white and X fixing. Like, especially the good stuff, like the original Alpha Beta duels. If I see a Plateau, if I see a Savannah, whatever, I will pick them up on the thought that, well, these are effectively free rolls for my land, and I might be able to get something at some point that I want to splash.
Okay. That's fine. Again, I think with this example, you just don't want to assume you're black-white control. You don't want to assume that you're playing black at all. And you want to stay as wide open as possible. It's funny to think that then you're kind of taking a two-color card with Lightning Helix or Forbidden Alchemy, but I think both of those are going to be stronger than Sunlance, Scroll Rack, or even taking a Molten Steel Dragon, which we didn't really even touch on. Molten Steel Dragon being a card that doesn't have a color commitment, although you could end up being red-white anyway. Now, again, it's possible at this table that Lightning Helix just tables. Now, in Pack 1, I think that's a lot less likely. I think that if this was Pack 2 or 3 and you were to see that Lightning Helix in this pack, people are going to be a little less interested in trying to find a way to play it if they don't have the fixing for it. You might be able to get that to come back to you as where you wouldn't see the dragon. But again, dragon, you can look at it so often as 4/4 flyer for 4 mana, 4 life. You could kind of think of it like a colorless Lava Hounds in many ways. So I don't want to completely dismiss that card in this pack, but I don't think it's where we want to be here. I think it really comes down to Helix or Alchemy, and it's almost a personal choice at that point. I would probably take Alchemy, again, for the reasons I talk about a lot in this show, but I think Helix is also a great thing to take.
I mean, I think Helix is fine. I think you can't go wrong with either. I probably would personally take Helix, but that might just because I drafted that sweet red-white deck last week, and it's still bouncing around in my brain.
Results oriented.
Yeah, of course. Gotta be results oriented.
So that was fun. I liked that idea. Did you enjoy that? We'll do more of that in the future.
I think it. So many people. You can go to any forum discussion website, anything, and pick one, pack one. And there's a bunch of options for any draft format because that's the easiest one to evaluate. But where it gets tricky is when you're later on and it trying to navigate. Pick pack 2.
Right, and the things that make really great, really, depth to formats is the changing in pick order. If we just sit here and we talk about, clearly Path to Exile is one of the top 20 cube cards. Yeah, and any time you see it, if one of the other 19 aren't there, you take it.
Yeah, mechanically ranking. I've actually had this discussion with Moses, my roommate, a lot because we've been, we taught him to play Magic recently. He's been cubing with us.
Yeah, Moses is actually a spectacular lab rat for us because we've kind of taken him in the last 5 or 6 months and kind of started him from 0 and kind of taken it to cube. And last week he was so close to going 2-1.
I know.
His first winning record in a cube draft. He's been coming for 4 months straight.
He's getting a lot better.
And he keeps coming back after only maybe winning 1 match, having a great time, and he's getting there. It was in game 3 of round 3. I really wanted to have it for him. It's going to be happening soon.
Anyway, one of the questions, in talking with Moses about picks and drafting and things like that is, he'll ask me questions like, well, what are the cards you would take over blank in a pack? Mm-hmm. Or if there's a Jitte in a pack, what are the cards you are taking over Jitte in pick 1, pack 1? Or if you're in this deck, how do you when do you draft this card versus these other cards? And it's been kind of this interesting discussion of there's no clear answer to a lot of those questions. You kind of have to feel it out, and it's you can't have a mechanical list. It will help to have a general grading, but once you get into the draft itself, you kind of have to evaluate what you've seen, what you haven't seen, what you have, what you don't have.
A great example is, pick 1, pack 1, you see GT. Odds are you're taking it.
Yeah.
Over most anything. Pick 1, pack 2, if you were to draft a bunch of blue control cards, maybe you got 2 creatures. You've got a Sphinx of Jor-El and a Moloku in pack 1. You open up that GT in pack 2, you're a lot less inclined to take it. I mean, it depends on what my other cards are, but let's say I'm blue-white control as usual.
Yeah.
And those are my only 2 creatures. I look at that card and I'm like, well, is there a counterspell in here? Is there a sweeper? I'll even take a D-blow or something. I mean, I'll find it, I'll know it'll table, and I'll see it later. Maybe that'll help me deal with it. But with creature-to-creature combat, GT is
I feel like this is a loaded question though, because if you're blue-white control, right, which also means you have Sun Titan.
I mean, not necessarily.
No, you specifically.
Oh, when I draft blue-white control, I always have Sun Titan?
Because you always draft Chaos or
Sun
Wasteland,
Titan?
Sun Titan in your blue-white decks.
True.
So Jitte fits right into that.
I guess.
You can get it back.
Sure, and put it on my Sun Titan that I need to put it on?
That's fine.
Because I haven't killed everything with Chaos Orb. And this is why these conversations only work so much.
Anyway.
Last week on the show, we talked about lands, and I really didn't feel like we got everything down. And we don't want to spend a whole other week talking about lands in Cube. But I think there was, we were going to go back to the drawing board. We were going to look at stuff that we maybe had missed and try to come up with those last kind of things stuff's moving around over here, may have missed on.
So these are just a few quick hits on lands that are in or out.
He says quick hits, and the first card we want to talk about is one I'm really interested to talk about. That's Bazaar of Baghdad. We should go back over to the...
I will.
Good. Only so much Eck can do with 2 monitors and a million things we need to be looking at once. Now, Bazaar of Baghdad has been one of those cards that's kind of sat on the outside of Cube for pretty much ever. And
it's never been in. Let's preface this.
That's the best way to put it. It's never been in. It's been sitting around for a really long time, and then even with those days where it's like, Urborg's really good, well, now Bazaar can tap for mana, it just never really got there. But I think it might be time.
It's definitely close. I think that we've done a lot of work lately with making graveyard-based decks better, try and ramp up the recursion, especially in black. It's an interesting effect. It's not going to fit in a ton of decks. This is not going to... I don't think Bazaar is going to be a top 5 pick for most people. It's not going to go early, but I think that in the decks that want it, it's going to be very useful. It's
I-
not going to be insane necessarily, but I think that it will work quite well in, Reanimator type decks. The Oversold Cemetery with the Ghouls Black Recursion decks would be fine with this card.
So, I think that it could be a top 5 pick for some decks moving forward, and now is the time for it, as my angle for black and trying to make black better is making the graveyard matter and trying to do more with it. Over the winter, we added Oversold Cemetery, Oath of Ghouls, trying to get more maximum value out of that. I mean, now we're having conversations about things like Ashen Ghoul, Nether Shade, Nether Trader, Icarid, trying to find more cards where you can get the black card advantage from the graveyard. Grave Pact has just entered the conversation again. And when I look at Bazaar, Baghdad, and Cube, I almost look at it as a bonus black card. That's where it's getting the most action.
I think that there's not really any madness left. Not that there was much to begin with, but the ability for other colors to take advantage of this outside of black is pretty minimal.
Genesis.
Sure.
Genesis makes it alright. Psychotog, but that's also a partly black card.
Yeah.
Sun Titan, we've mentioned before. I think initially it starts as a black card, but players will find ways to make it better. I mean, again, we're still talking about a limited format where you're going to get some lands in your hand, and you're probably going to want to discard them, and Bazaar can be kind of a way to get back out from under that for decks. I'm not sure exactly which decks those will be.
Life from the Loam also.
Yes.
Sweet with Bazaar.
Life from the Loam, very good with Bazaar. A bit of a dredge thing. We brought in Stinkweed Imp. Again, I think there's more room for it to grow and do different things now than there ever has been in Cube in the past. And I think what really pushes it over the top is the hope and the crafting of what black will be in the future. Now, one of the preview cards we saw from Duels 14 that we can assume is in M14 coming out is I forget the name of it. It's that demon guy. We talked about it last
Shadowborn Demon.
Shadowborn Demon. The 5/6 flyer for 5 that when he comes into play, he destroys a non-demon. So already hitting non-black creatures. And then if you don't have, was it 5 or 6 guys in your yard?
6 guys in your yard.
It's a bit sketchy for limited, but it can still happen with Bazaar. Now, all of a sudden, that guy gets a lot better. So that's something I'm really looking at being like, again, trying to find the future of black, trying to have it be engaging with the graveyard. I think Bazaar goes a long way in helping that set of circumstances, and it's not just like what it would have been 2 or 3 years ago, where it's like, oh, it's a reanimator enabler. You just put your fatties in your graveyard, and then
the fact that it has more use now than it possibly has ever had before, gets it to the point of discussion. Whereas before it was like, oh, Bazaar is this sweet old card. Next.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, the old school of thought was, if you're not drafting Reanimator, then, I sandbag a few lands in my hand, and then I will discard them to the Bazaar, and then I'll have real card advantage again. So, moving on from that one, but I think that Bazaar Baghdad is pretty much the biggest impact land to change the landscape of lands in the cube.
Wow, that was a landy sentence.
I didn't mean for it to be initially. Here we've got Mirrodin's Core. Mirrodin's Core is one of those 5-color mana fixers, which was really prominent back in Cube years ago when the 5-color Dragon Wars took place in Cube. Nowadays, I'm kind of on the fence about it. Last week we talked a lot about bounce lands, having impact coming to play tapped and being slower. We talked about how one of the ways we can help aggressive decks in our 700-card powered cube is to bring in more lands that come into play untapped. And Mirrodin's Core kind of skirts the line there. It's kind of like, it comes into play untapped and can produce mana initially. It also can produce 5 colors of mana, just slowly and over time.
This one, it just feels like modern Cube has passed this one by. It's just, by modern standards, it is too slow. It wasn't before, and I think it was fine because turns 1 through 4 were so lacking in action because everyone was drafting 5 drops and up.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, Mirrodin's Core was fine. You just load it up with counters, and then for the rest of the game, it's a painless City of Brass. For the most part.
Loaded up with counters.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, you didn't do it. Nobody did anything for the first several turns of the game, so you could just keep charging it.
I know, it's like threaten Memory Lapse or put a counter on it.
Right.
Threaten Carbonize or put a counter on it.
So, but the Cube decks today and the way Cube is constructed today it is too... Control decks are too fast for this card, I feel. I mean, occasionally you're going to have a very slow, grindy, 5-color deck that is going to want this effect, but I just feel it's just a little too slow. There's just no upside on it versus a number of other cards, and it's okay. I think that, especially in a budget cube situation, this would be a fine pick to play. But
you can't afford a City of Brass.
Well, I mean, like, if you need fixing and you don't have a bunch of other stuff, just because it's 5-color, and
yeah.
I think that it's just low. I would not want this in a number of my cube decks, including the 5-color ones.
I think a good card or set of cards to kind of match this card up against would be Vivid Lands.
Yeah, kind of in reverse. Like Vivid Lands tap for.
I guess reverse works.
Yeah.
I mean, what I'm going to say is when you play a Vivid Land, the first turn you play it, you know you're not going to get anything out of it.
Yeah.
But you know, subsequent turn, you're going to be able to get any color of the rainbow out of it. Mirrodin's Core kind of gives you that option, but also lets you play a spell immediately for all those games in which you've played a Vivid Land and cursed the skies because you can't cast something.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a bad Vivid Land. I would say it's pretty much on par with a Vivid Land.
Sure. It's kind of like how Wormcoil Engine is the 6th Titan.
Only it's just strictly superior in cube.
But aside from that,
if Wormcoil Engine was the 6th Titan, it would be the gold medalist of Titans.
Alright, so that's enough to talk about.
Okay, now here is one that's definitely not in the cube today, and I think is one that you'll forget about for a long time.
Oh, this is bad. Why are we talking about this?
Well, we're talking about it for a couple of reasons, and I think one is with the kind of back seat that Zoo has taken in cube recently. Unstable Frontier, which is what we're talking about for those just listening to this after the fact, does stuff. And for a short period of time when it first came out in Conflux, it was in the cube, helping out our good buddy Wild Nicodle, Kurdape, doing things like that. You know, maybe it's a turn where you don't need that extra mana. Maybe it's a situation where, you know, having a Shimmering Gorge can go a long way. This card functions differently, allowing you to straight up make different land types and pump your guys, pump your Tribal Flames, pump your allied strategies, pump your Collective Restraint, and so on and so forth.
This is bad.
I wish we'd done an April Fool's episode.
Yeah, this would be on it, I feel.
Look, you want ways to make Zoo better. You want ways to play Loam Lion, Kurdape, Wild Nicodle all in the same deck and try to give them a little bit more consistency because those fetch lands and dual lands are obviously going to get drafted very highly. Here is a way to do it. Am I saying that I'm going to do it today? No, but you could.
Okay,
You could also slowly screw your opponent. Turn off the blue. Make it white. You don't have white in your deck. I know it's not the
Let me just bracket this conversation by asking a question. How large, assuming cube was to expand to any number.
This is a good one.
How many cards would be in cube before this one gets added?
Okay, so that is an excellent comment. And that is one that you could pretty much give.
I'm going to say like 5,000.
5,000. I was going to say how many lands would have to be in cube.
Like,
but if we blew it up proportionally, this would mean that in the next 40 lands that got added to cube, this would be somewhere in 50 or 60 lands in the cube. This would be somewhere in the list.
It would deeper than that.
Look, it was in the extras binder. It was something that I remember playing, and I remember it having a positive effect on games in the past. And having just recently lost Kurdape and lost Loam Lion and lost these things, I thought, you know what? I'll give it a minute of our time. We got nothing to lose here.
Sure. All right.
Again, for the most part, we're talking about subpar cards. I mean, I think Bazaar is really the talking point here when it comes to lands.
All right, so next we got Mystifying Maze.
Mystifying Maze. Yeah, the fact that you actually can't hit your own creatures with this kind of kills it for me, and that might seem weird.
So you can't, slide, slippity slide.
So that's the thing. You know, when we first were trying to test this for M11, there's all these Enters the Battlefield creatures.
All these extra pieces.
And as Cube continues to go on, it's like, well, I don't really want to slide out Necrotal. I don't really want to slide out my opponent's Titan. I don't really...
Yeah.
Like,
oh, sweet, I'm sliding out their Ogre Arsonist.
Okay. So we were looking at it and we're like, okay, well, if we can slide out our own creatures, it kind of gets back.
Yeah.
It kind of
If you like a rat at this, to just like cross out the line that says
opponent?
an opponent controls, maybe. But I mean, like the argument I hear about this card is like, oh, it's like Maze of It that taps for mana, but at the same time, it's also Maze of It that costs 5 mana effectively to activate,
right.
which is just it's real slow.
Yeah, I'm thinking we should not bother to hold on to this one anymore.
No, I don't think so.
I don't know if this card's on anyone else's list anymore.
I mean, I've seen it.
Oh, you should wait. Go back to the list.
Yeah.
You should go down to that one. Oh, right now. Oh, you just missed it. That one. Do that one next because
Okay.
it ties into.
Okay. Cards that are no longer in.
So Mystifying Maze was the year after Gargoyle Castle. Now Gargoyle Castle was in Cube for
Quite a while.
not that long because M10 came out and then Worldwake came out.
Oh, right. I mean, I have fond memories of this being okay though.
I do. Gargoyle Castle again. If we were to add like 30 lands to the cube, I think Gargoyle Castle would get there.
I think it's closer than a number of the other ones on this list. I think it's fine in a number of cubes. I think it's just kind of...
It's a sad day because I like Gargoyle Castle. I don't think it'll ever find its way back in just because we've been given more man lands that are just so much better, and we expect to get more man lands that are better before a time would come around where we want Gargoyle Castle again.
Yeah, the fact that it's a colorless is kind of nice because it'll go in a lot of decks, but a lot of decks also don't want an effect that slow. It's okay. It's not great.
Yes, you are
okay.
completely correct. Gargoyle Castle is okay.
And it's just, that's not really where I want my cube cards to be.
Meanwhile, now we have a card that's actually worth discussion, I think, and that's Contested Cliffs. When this card was in Onslaught, a good friend of ours went pretty deep with it, and actually, no, it was a deck that was at Nationals the year it came out, I believe. It did stuff, that being Contested Cliffs.
I think it's... You really have to warp how you build your cube to make this better. Like, you have to very intentionally be adding beasts. I would not just slap this into any cube.
I would also not slap it into any cube. I think our cube is just too big for it. I think smaller cubes could actually run this card if you know where your creature types are at.
Conversely, if you are explicitly having a tribal cube...
Well, yeah,
which is... But I mean, like, not just
Beast Cube lol.
Yeah, sure, Beast Cube. But I'm, like, you can have... this is another effect that I don't see people talk about a lot. And I think that
Wolf Run would always
fine.
be in over this, as well as the chat would say yes. I would run Wolf Run over Contested Cliffs. Contested Cliffs does something, though, that I think that you just undervalue, and that's being able to just literally blow out smaller guys left and right. And heaven forbid you actually have a Spirit Monger on the table with this card. Then it gets insane.
Yeah.
Back when Ravenous Baloth was printed and Contested Cliffs was printed, all of a sudden a bunch of creature cards that you just didn't think about, like what their creature type was, you'd start to look into.
It all of a sudden became relevant.
Yeah, and Beast was one of them. And again, all of a sudden Spirit Monger was a Beast. You're like, what the hell? Like, that's ridiculous. And over the years, it's kind of like come and gone. Morning Tide kind of helped out a little bit with that. Obviously Chameleon Colossus interacts with this card positively. But I could see a smaller cube that had more of those kind of red and green aggressive creatures that could take advantage of this.
Sure.
Wanting this card in your cube. I think our cube is too big. It can't really run
It's this weird paradox, though, because if your cube is small, you only have room really for one red-green function land, and you're probably playing Wolf Run over it. So you would want a bigger cube that has room to have both, but if your cube is that big, you don't have enough beasts in density-wise to support this card.
I feel like we're being trolled by Sam here, but he'd like to know how Arena compares to Contested Cliffs.
Not well.
You could bring up Arena. I think reading the rules text on Arena actually will help you understand why it's different a lot.
Yeah.
Arena...
They get to pick.
Yeah, that's
They
kind of what it
choose
boils
their-
down to. I
choose their destiny.
Choose your champion. Each player gets to choose their champion.
All right.
And because of that... and also doesn't tap for mana, which really sucks.
Not having for mana is bad.
Now, I can't remember if we discussed this card last week. I want to discuss it. Tomb of Arami, I love this card. No one else likes this card.
I'm going to just say it with my head in my hands.
I really like Tomb of Arami.
It's so bad.
Aggro Black Decks makes a 5/5 flyer.
That's so bad.
It doesn't, go away EOT. It just, that's your finisher right there. I like this card.
I'm going to repeal it. I'm going to draw a card while you Armageddon yourself. This thing is horrid.
I mean, you obviously don't do it until the coast is clear.
This is so bad.
Yeah, I think I'm probably the only person in the world that likes this card.
I don't even know why you like it.
It gives you a reach.
No.
It gives you a way to just finish the game.
No.
You're getting in there. You got your Bloodghast. You got your Nighthawks. You got your all your hypnotic specters, you get your opponent down there, and all of a sudden he like lands some big stuff, and you're like, okay, well I got this.
No.
Tomb you. They can't counter it. It has flying. You do an EOT. Make sure the coast is clear. You've obviously thought seized them to know the coast is clear.
If you ever put this back in Cube, I'm going to call like Cube Protective Services and have them take custody away from you. Anyway.
No one on the internet will defend me at all on this card.
No, because they shouldn't.
That pretty much wraps up our conversation for lands. I think we've pretty much touched on everything we wanted to touch on. We go back to last week's episode. We talked about all the Urza Cycle lands. Phyrexian Tower may or may not have some new room to explore in the future. This week, I just really want to make sure we talked about Bazaar Baghdad, because I think that's really a big player in the future. And, has gone up in value a little bit in the last few months, so we might not be the only people catching on to this. I know that the guys over at East West Draftcast, Greg and Jeff, they put it in their cube, along with Spencer and the rest of those guys. I don't want to leave anyone out. And they love it. I mean, I haven't really heard a great why yet, but they've made it work for them. And, again, I love Magic nostalgia. I love playing with cards that maybe you haven't played with a really long time, and like the kids don't even know exist, and that can be a lot of fun.
So let's move on. We've kind of very, I feel like, concretely covered lands, the ins and the outs, the whats, the whys, and the why nots.
Pretty good. Last week we did a lot with fixing. We talked a lot about coming into play tapped, untapped, how much allied, how much enemy. Again, feel free to hit us up with messages if you have strong feelings one way or another about that. But today, hopefully in just about an hour, we're going to try to tackle artifacts. I don't know how easy or not easy that's going to be, but you can actually bring up the cube list itself if you go to ekamon.blogspot.com. If we show that in the...
I'll link the Google Doc as well.
Or you can link the Google Doc.
The link is available in a number of different places. We're talking specifically about artifacts this week, and a similar thing that we did last week about why things are in and why things are not in, and what we're missing and what we're not.
Artifacts has got to be the hardest section in Cube to talk about, and what's awkward about it isn't so much that there's too many good ones, or they're just, I guess overpowered comes into it, but finding all that mana fixing and acceleration, and really where the power is in Cube versus where it's not in Cube. It's really where artifacts break down. When you talk about a powered cube or an unpowered cube, sure, you've got Ancestral Recall, you've got Black Lotus maybe. Right, no, sorry. No, not the brown stuff. The non-brown stuff. You got Ancestral Recall, you got Time Walk. Maybe you have Twister, probably not. You have all these colored cards, they kind of touch around the landscape. But artifacts, especially power, is really where you're breaking the rules. And you kind of have to think, am I doing it or am I not doing it?
I think there's just, like Lewis just said in chat, there are so many auto-includes in the artifact section.
I don't know, it feels like it's not as many as you'd think. Because artifacts is really this ungoverned territory. As were lands, feels like it has a lot of constrictions about, we have to put in so much fixing, it has to be these particular cards, we have to make sure that they exist. And with the colored restrictions about spells and converted mana costs and types, artifacts is the most open landscape. I think that you could put pretty much anywhere between 40 to 90 to 100 artifacts in a cube, and it would be hard-pressed for someone to really argue with you.
Yeah, I think one of the other interesting things about artifacts is, just because of the nature of them, there are so many different directions you can go and have them all be good. Like, there are a number of cubes that have, for instance, like, Metalworker and, like, that plan and kind of like the mono-brown deck kind of concept.
Yeah, that's a big commitment, and we've talked about that in the past, and it's never really come to fruition. I think when I talk about cards like Metalworker and Goblin Welder, I really want to make sure the artifact lands are there. All of a sudden you start talking about Workshop and Academy again, and they're just too narrow.
Another great thing, though, about artifacts is that, you can look at kind of any color or archetype that exists in Cube, and if you feel that, control isn't winning very much, aggro seems to be way better in our Cube, or, this type of deck isn't doing well, or whatever, you could turn to the artifacts to really bolster a given color or a given archetype without necessarily affecting a lot of the color picks.
You hope.
That's the goal.
I think it's funny, there aren't as many great artifact creatures in Magic as there were 10, 15 years ago.
The standards have changed.
Maybe that's weird, but looking at things nowadays, it's just not the same. But we're starting to touch on a lot of topics. We'll head over the chat and look real quick here. Yes, Lewis, I do miss Arc of Blight. There's no color requirements, so there's no need to balance. Yeah, that's very true.
Artifacts is definitely where you can get away with a lot more of, I just want to play this card or that card.
Yeah. It really starts with mana. And Moxes or no Moxes. Signets or no Signets. 2-mana rocks or no 2-mana rocks. Mana Vaults, Grim Monoliths, Mana Crypts, or none of that fast accelerant, Soul Ring included in those things.
Yeah. As you'll note in our cube list, the mana artifact section is the largest of all the sections.
Yeah, we put in the key runes because I really like their versatility. Again, with LD, there was a long time we ran Arc of Blight. I think my favorite story with Arc of Blight is I was playing against Evan Irwin with the cube, and Evan blood braid elfed into Arc of Blight.
The end.
Yeah, the end. That's the whole story.
What a story.
And that was kind of that moment where I was like, alright, maybe Arc isn't the best. In theory, you could lay it onto Stone Rain on 3, and that's good. But
so I think, really...
You can get it back with Academy Runes every turn. Sorry, I have a problem. I understand.
Yeah, I know you do. I think one of the interesting things... I think what's more interesting about, especially our artifact section, is kind of some of the stuff that isn't in, as well as the stuff that is. Like, for instance, the fact that we've...
No, it was my cube. I had the Arc of Blight. It was my bad. Evan was just playing. He was working within the confines that he had.
So the fact that we have 4 of the 5 swords is kind of a point that a lot of people get.
Let's finish with mana.
Fine.
We're gonna fragment over too much. We're not gonna cover enough stuff. Our cube is 700 cards and it's powered. We have Moxes. I like it. It doesn't come up super often, and the games where you feel like you get an extra land drop are few enough and far enough in between that I like it.
Yeah, I don't have a problem. Everyone is pretty aware of, you don't pass power, and it kind of rewards. It doesn't reward anyone unequally, so to speak, and I think it's fine. Most of the fun stories come from insanely accelerated plays with Lotus or Moxen.
I've had a turn 1 hero blade hold. That game did not last long.
Yeah.
I think someone in the chat was the person that got hit against. So yeah, we don't skimp on any of the brown acceleration. It's all in there. And because of that, there's one of the reasons why my cube plays a lot more like, let's say, a Mirrodin block limited or a Saga block limited, where you're going to be able to main deck those disenchants and have them be good a lot of times. And it feels really rewarding when you get to play those cards and have them be good. So again, we're trying to play with the most powerful cards in Magic ever printed. We're not trying to put limitations on ourselves in that way, but we're trying to govern it and kind of move it in a way that it still works. And I've found that the disenchants and having them be main deckable goes a really long way there. The idea is that it's pretty unfun. It's like this sub-game. It can be. So, we value the disenchants higher. That kind of balances out the fact that we have the Mind Stone, the Cold Steel Heart, the Felwar Stone, all these other prismatic lens, all these 2-mana accelerants, along with the Moxes, along with Vault Crypt,
and I think
Soul Ring, and so on and so forth.
I think that, we used to have Signets in, and I think that I agree with the cutting of them. If you look at our 2-mana rocks, we have, Guardian Idol.
They're all there.
Felwar Stone, Cold Steel Heart. For the most part, you do not get a ton of, easy, free mana fixing from the 2-mana ones. There's a number of colorless ones. There's a number of ones that are, will fix your mana but at a slower rate. Cold Steel Heart comes into play tapped, only makes 1 color.
But even if there were 10 Mind Stones in the cube, it would still be very, very good.
It's still good, but I think that removing the ability for having a giant stack of 2-mana artifacts that everyone wants that also color fixes, I think was an important move in terms of making greens fixing better and kind of like leveling that playing field, or bringing it back to more like where it should be. And
that's kind of the classic Signet argument. I think that if we were to put all 10 Signets back in, then you start looking at Metalworker differently, you start looking at Welder slightly differently, you start looking at Academy slightly differently, because there's so many decks that want all of those Signets all the time. And we played with Signets for a long time in Cube, and even with all those disenchant style effects, it just wasn't enough, because there would be such a distinct advantage all the time with having access to so much of that stuff. So you'll really notice that in the 2-mana accelerants that we include, And I think the best example of this is the strangely one outlier card on the mana section, and that's Fire Diamond. Fire Diamond was a conscious decision that was made a handful of months ago to really keep Wildfire big red decks in the fold, make them a thing and make them exciting and viable. Whereas, a few years ago, Wildfire was very much a thing because it had access to all those signets. Once we stripped those away, it became more of a concern that those things would be plausible or not.
That was one of the decks that got hurt the worst by taking out signets. I think Fire Diamond's fine. Fire Diamond's going to see its way into plenty of decks that are not purely Wildfire, but it will obviously be best in the big red decks.
I think if you had to rank the archetypes that were hurt most by the removal of signets, it would be Wrath of God decks, which kind of includes Wildfire decks, but I'll consider Wildfire decks their own thing.
Sweeper decks.
Yeah, sweeper decks. But, namely, you're casting a spell that costs 4, 5, or 6 mana that's going to get you back into a game that you would have lost to the Goblin Guides and the Kurt Apes of the world.
Then Tinker being the second.
Tinker also got a hit from it, but we're up to 90 artifacts now. I don't think that Tinker was super mad that it lost his signet, because Tinker wasn't going off any faster than it was now.
Yeah.
So
that's mana.
That's mana. I don't think we're missing anything there. We could talk about key runes real fast. That is not a complete cycle. It's a partial cycle of the ones we felt like did stuff.
It's the ones that are good.
And I think that in a further update, you're going to see us scale it back a little bit more on key runes. I think I got a little overzealous thinking that they were going to be cool all the time. But something like Celestia key rune has really underperformed, despite the fact that it's the big Papa one.
Simic key rune has been pretty sad, too.
I don't know. I think I got you with that recently. Hexproof is just really good.
Yeah.
And being able to not be a guy on your opponent's turn is really good. It's kind of like the new school Jade statue, I feel like.
I really like, of the key runes, I really like Rakdos, and I really like Dimir.
I think of all the key runes, I like Rakdos, and I like Azorius the most.
Yeah.
Because I'm always drafting Blue Eye Control, and then I went with Azorius key rune.
Right. I mean, they function pretty similarly in the evasion being just really good.
So in the future, there's going to be a shift to where the key runes are in the cube. But for our brown mana, I feel like we have a little bit more than the average bear. I feel like we do have all the power. We try to kind of offset that with making disenchants matter more. I want you to be able to main deck one or two of them in your decks and feel good about it and have them be good and bring another dynamic element of play that you don't always get to have in limited formats. I mean, we played a ton of Onslaught Limited, and you would get that naturalized 13th to 15th pick all day long, and then maybe one game out of 9 you would board it in, and then if you maybe drew it, you got rid of the Sandscan or the Righteous Cause, or whatever this one card was that might be holding you up. And there are so many limited formats that kind of echo that feeling, and I really love Saga Limited. Saga Limited is probably the best example, a little bit more than Mirrodin Limited, because all of a sudden a card like Shatter shot through the roof in value in Mirrodin Limited, as where in Saga Limited, all these cards had cycling. So if you could find the Clears and the... Clear's a good enough example. Cards like that for your draft deck, you had a lot of versatility, so you could use them in times they were good, but also get rid of them. And here we're just making it so they're good all the time.
All right.
Okay.
What section do you want to do next?
Let's talk about equipment. This was a conversation I feel like I had on Twitter a month or two ago about what percentage of your artifacts would you set aside for equipment? How much is it going to be? Strangely enough, talking to a lot of people that are very actively cubing, it kind of came down to a strangely around 11%. I know this
so
feels
oddly
weird.
specific.
I know, right? 7 in 60. 9 in 70. I think we have 11 or 12 in 90.
We have 14.
14, breaking the rules.
So we're going
not that they're really rules.
So I'm a big proponent of equipment in Cube. I think that equipment is a great way for, especially just because the majority of your aggressive decks on pure card-to-card power level are going to fall behind your control decks. And I think that equipment is a great way to make that up. Converting, your dopey little 1/1s and 2/1s into 4/3 pro-black, pro-green monsters that do a bunch of stuff, or, that draw you cards.
Mask of Memory is definitely one of those
I
cards.
love Mask of Memory.
Yeah, that's one of those ones that gets left behind in a lot of cubes.
I feel like that should be in most people's cubes. I think it's really underrated.
I think the reason it gets left out of their cubes is they're just not big enough.
Yeah.
But people, I think there are definitely people that are unaware of the existence of Mask of Memory. So yeah, when it comes to equipment, there are a lot of what feels like auto includes. I mean, you've got your Batterskull, you've got
Skull Clamp.
your Skull Clamp, you've got your swords, you've got your Jite, and if let's say you only have 7 or 8 spots, you're running out of space real fast. We love Mortarpod. I think Mortarpod is one of those cards that really come out of the backfield almost.
Mortarpod was definitely a underrated, underappreciated kind of card, but once we tried it, I think everybody loved it.
It's a great reach thing against control. It's a great, against aggro, it plays so much like Mirrodin Besieged Limited, where that extra toughness goes a long way you don't think about. The ability to throw things to kind of like get through the line of scrimmage, and also be able to go over the top of things.
And like even against aggressive decks, like block a guy, shoot a guy when they attack with 2 creatures is like so satisfying feeling. Like fogging basically with that card is also awesome. Like I really like it. You know, if you have anything crazy to abuse with it, you know, you're just living the dream. But like even if it's just slapping on random tokens or whatever dudes you got lying around, I think Mortarpod's always good. The fact that it's a guy also makes your other equipment better.
Or if your opponent's going to edict you, or the fact that it's a guy comes up a lot more than you'd think, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
It's not if it had come the pre-living weapon era, it probably would have had to cost 1. But I think it speaks a lot to the power level of the card that it actually costs 2, and you can't Trinket Mage for it. You can't kind of like.
That would be awesome.
Agreed. Now, talking about the weaker end of the spectrum on equipment, I think things that we might just have because we have space for them, I think it's really the Bone Splitter, the Lightning Greaves, and a little bit of the Basilisk Collar kind of thing.
Interesting. I was actually going to say Grafted Wargear.
Grafted Wargear is a house. That card's a house.
Okay.
The card's a house. I mean, obviously in Arcube it's a little more susceptible because there's so many disenchants running around. But I still think, like, you have a 4/3 Bitter Blossom token every turn? Game over.
That's a very ideal situation.
So, equipment that I've considered cutting recently that we've had to talk a lot about would be cards like Locks on Warhammer, Lightning Greaves, and Batterskull. Basilisk Collar kind of got a renewed sense of worth with the inclusion of Trinket Mage and the inclusion of Cunning Spark Mage.
I like Basilisk Collar. I'm one of the people who will play that card even if I don't have a pinger.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, you could just have a First Striker.
Or just even it's a great way to win races in aggressive matchups. You know, if you're just even if you're just in creature combat, like it's very hard for your opponent to get ahead of you when you're gaining a couple of life a turn and you're always getting one of their guys.
It's similar to Locks on Warhammer, but on a much cheaper, smaller scale. Yeah. The thing about Locks on Warhammer is it takes 6 mana to go from 0 to something.
It's very clunky. It's good. It's like obviously very good.
But Basilisk Collar doesn't have that problem. And the thing, so Basilisk Collar and Warhammer are slightly tied together, and we have so much Suicide Black going around nowadays that I really like having these 2 life gain equipments that Black can have access to. I think that as we add in more of the Ambitions, Cost, Night's Whisper, Necropotence type effects into Cube, we want to have ways to offset Black having these problems.
Yeah.
And you can only add so many Ivory Towers and Zern Orbs and hope that they do anything. So the equipment that gains life goes a long way there. And I think when we talked about the Skeleton Cube list, I think that was one of the reasons we wanted to include War and Peace in the Skeleton Cube.
Yeah.
If you look at the Skeleton Cube list, as far as equipment goes, that's a place where it's really tight, and you have to be really key with your inclusions. Now, this list is a little obviously more liberal, but we can talk about swords here, and it brings us up to the topic of you don't have a complete cycle. Why are we missing Sword of Body and Mind?
Especially because Body and Mind, at first glance, in Limited is the best one.
I mean, it doesn't have protection for the most relevant colors, although in
its
Cube,
effect is like
having protection from blue is really good.
So
no one's going to argue.
No.
Sword of Body and Mind is an excellent card. The fact that it's the only sword that hits and makes more bodies to equip sword to is spectacular.
It works for itself. I think, and no one's really arguing that the power level of Body and Mind was not good enough for Cube or anything like that. The problem that came up routinely with Body and Mind was that as soon as it hit play, especially if it hit once, the entire game stopped and turned into a subgame about dealing specifically with sword. It just became like a really uninteresting Scheherazade situation where all of a sudden you have to stop playing the rest of your game of Magic to focus on dealing with this sword because it'll kill you in 2 hits.
Similarly to how Planeswalkers were kind of a problem when they first came around, and how that kind of translated over to Cube and Standard and all these other formats where Planeswalkers created a subgame, the Mill 10 cards create a very quick, short, shitty subgame.
Yeah.
Where...
If it was, like, so someone brought it up in the chat, errata it to make it 5-card mill. If we did that, it would be in Cube. Because I think 5 is a fair enough number that you could still reliably mill people out, potentially, but it's not like the game is over in 2 turns.
Right, and 5 would be kind of cool because now all of a sudden with those Black Graveyard decks or those Reanimator decks, it becomes a bit of a liability. You're like, oh, well, maybe this isn't the angle of attack I want to come from.
Right.
But all of those decks do not have enough time, more often than not, to come back from take 10 cards, take 10 cards, take 10 cards. Or not even. I mean,
take 10 cards, take 10 cards.
This came up in the mocks, specifically in a match that I saw being broadcast, where BDM and Marshall were like looking at a game where somebody got hit by Sword of Body and Mind. They're like, oh, it's okay. They could come back from this set of circumstances, get a little bit of a board presence. It's like, dude, the guy has 2 cards left in his library. Like, it's not a game anymore.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that he's at 16 and he has some board presence and he can draw out of it. There's just nothing to do.
That's kind of the same reason why, while it's on an artifact, we don't have Jace Memory Adept.
Yep.
Because the Mill 10 is just too... It's too fast of... It just makes this really unfun.
I mean, Jace Memory Adept is literally like these 2 problems together melded into one card, where it's like, okay, Planeswalkers create a subgame that isn't necessarily fun. Mill 10 creates a subgame that isn't fun. Now they're together on one card.
Yeah.
And that was what I was going to talk about. So we took out the Mill 10s. For a little while, we ran
Sands of Delirium.
Sands of Delirium in the cube, thinking like, okay, control decks, there could be a control on Troll Mirror. If you go back to Magic's history, Millstone was a win condition. This could be a thing that's real. Now control decks can even have this extra angle. Well, it's like, well, I want to play my Eldrazi, because maybe I'll get to 10 mana to cast it. As Michael Bullen would say, for inevitability. But you also have the way to, reset the game, similar to like the Psychic Spiral card in Standard, but not that narrow. So we're like, okay, let's come at it from a different angle. Sands wasn't well received. It didn't go that far. Again, with all the artifact destruction we had in the cube, it rarely ended up being the win condition. So now we're running Increasing Confusion, and Increasing Confusion is kind of butting its head up against the wall, where it's kind of like, oh, is this too good? I mean, I want it to be Blue Fireball, but now it's kind of like, well, is it...
Now it's like Blue Super Fireball.
If you have Intuition and Increasing Confusion in your draft, like, you have just this backdoor win condition all day long.
It's so disgusting.
So good.
Any kind of, like, gifts... You put Increasing Confusion in there, like, it's just disgusting. And I think Increasing Confusion is fine for right now, but I think it's on the watch list.
Yeah, and that's pretty much where it is.
This may be too good, too unfun, too, like, it just ends the game so hard, especially the second time around. Like, I've seen a number of games where someone is losing, and they'll cast Increasing Confusion to 0 to get it into their yard, to then flash it back for double to mill their opponent out and win. I
think it was like Casey, like 2 weeks ago. He didn't get the whole concept of casting it for 0 and then casting it for 8 or 9.
Yeah, like,
in the same turn.
Like the Hail Mary pass kind of thing like that. And I mean, it's fine to have some cards like that in Cube, but Increasing Confusion it's close.
I'm still in the 4 camp.
I'm in the 4 camp, but I feel like it would not take too much negative experience with that card to push it into the this is not fun like the Mill 10s.
I will try to give it one last push of being a positive argument, especially because this is like Artifact Day and we're talking about blue cards. It's kind of similar to Poison in regards to where it's like, well, your opponent really has 10 life because you're just milling for usually 20 to finish the game off. And in that regard, it's Blue Fireball for Poison almost. If you kind of like break it down to that, it feels like it makes a lot more sense, and it feels like it's a very reasonable card.
Yeah. Okay. So we did equipment. Let's do...
Feel good about equipment. We can touch on... Colorless gets marked into artifacts a lot. Now, in Colorless, it's not a whole lot to talk about, but there's, 2 notable non-existent cards, I think, here we can touch on. We have the Ulamog, we have the Kozilek, we don't have the Emrakul.
15 is a bit much.
We talked about it when we talked about the MTGO cube changes, and Emrakul is one of those cards where the likelihood of you actually casting it is actually so low, especially since we don't have Channel. That is the other one. Like, the chat is a little bit ahead of us. that I just... Nothing about Emrakul is the kind of thing that excites me about Magic as where the other two Eldrazi are. Emrakul is... It's got protection from too many things. It has flying. It's all over. And yes, one person has fun, and I feel like we already have enough of that in Cube. Like, there's enough one-sided scenarios.
He's just never casting a 15-mana spell fairly, I feel. Or like,
casting is just the key thing.
But I mean, that thing's getting toothed and nailed out,
right?
Channeled out.
And those things are all very likely with the other Eldrazi. But the other Eldrazi could also find the Thran Dynamo Basalt Monolith.
You're right. That's
Raphalos.
You can cast Kozilek.
And they're kind of fun. Like, Kozilek Draw 4 is fun. Ulamog Vindicate something, deal with my 11/11 or 10/10 Indestructible, can still be like a game can be played, where with Emrakul those things just don't happen.
The game's just over. The other notable exclusion right now is All of Dust.
All is Dust. Now, All is Dust, it's been in and out several times.
I think it's fine.
I also think it's fine. I think it suffers a little bit from the Akroma's Vengeance syndrome. Now, they're not exactly the same, because this one actually saves your artifacts, as opposed to Akroma's Vengeance, where you kind of ramp into losing all your stuff. But I feel like, with All is Dust, it's just effectively costed at 7 to keep me away from it. Where I have to work to get all that brown out, to then make this thing happen, and if I don't draw that specific set of things together, it's a blank, and I sit in my hand and I lose, or it's like a super expensive Diabolic Edict.
I think it's fine. I would not be upset to see it back in. I like it as an additional way to deal with Planeswalkers is one of the reasons I like that card. The fact that it's colorless means that a lot of times you will be dealing with permanents that whatever color you're playing cannot normally deal with. Black enchantment removal or something to that effect. Green creature removal if need be. And I think
it's just so awkward because it's like the two things you mentioned is like, okay, black enchantment removal, but a lot of where black's advantages comes through enchantments. Well, it's like, okay, well, it's late in the game. I guess best case scenario, I sweep my own deck or I sweep my opponent's stuff. For the green decks, it's like, oh, often to get to that mana effectively, I use creatures.
Yeah,
it's similar to Akroma's Vengeance.
It's certainly, unless you're playing kind of like a very heavy artifact deck, it's a little awkward. But at the same time, you're giving pretty much everyone equal access to dealing with problematic permanents that they could not normally deal with otherwise. And I think that's a powerful effect in Cube. And I think that if it was in, it would get drafted and a number of people would play it. But I think that right now it's not in and no one necessarily misses it. You know what I mean? Like, no one's like, oh man, where's All is Dust? But at the same time, if All of Dust was in, people would be like, yeah, All is Dust, I'm going to play that. Like, it's one of those cards that it's just like, if it was in, people would play it and no one would really talk about it. But it's out, and still no one really talk. Like, it almost doesn't matter if it's in and out.
Maybe. We put Sigarda in, then we bring back All is Dust.
Go for the combo.
Now, when you, like, ramp out with your green creatures, and you All is Dust... I'm not going to say your name is Chumley.
No.
So that's where we are on the Colorless side. That kind of explains our philosophy about why we have what we have, why we don't have what we have.
Karn's pretty obvious. Karn's liberated.
That guy doesn't really need help.
Alright, so creatures.
On the creature side,
we're pretty light on artifact creatures at this point.
I wish there were more that were better today. I really want to put Grid Monitor in the cube. I really want to put...
You have an unhealthy obsession with Grid Monitor.
I do.
The card's never...
I really wish the other Masticores were better. I feel like I've tried so hard to keep just Masticore in the cube, and maybe that's one of the reasons we're going to have to bring back Gaia's Cradle to kind of re-energize Masticore. Over the years, all 3 Masticores would have been there, and just there's too much card disadvantage with them. And
they definitely have had like an interesting dance of in and out, because I feel like all of them, we've had anywhere from 1 to 3 Masticores in at any given time. And which ones are in and out at any given time is also, like, very different. They kind of, like, rotate and jump back in and out and in and out. Like, the original Masticore has kind of been the only one who's really, like, held the fort down.
We've definitely tried Chimeric Idol in the past. I think he was in the most previous iteration. And then when we added Trinket Mage back into the cube, we even went a step further and added Chimeric Mass. And then I don't think they saw enough action. I think nowadays I would still add Chimeric Idol before I added Chimeric Mass back in. It's just so easy to kind of have that 3 for 3 spot 3 mana for a 3/3 spot, then that can be Wrath preventative, but also just kind of show up at any given moment. Although it was surprising how weird in the aggressive decks, it's like, oh, do I attack with my Stirring Wildwood, or do I attack with my Chimeric Idol?
Yeah.
You couldn't be like,
it was
activate, enter combat. No,
it was surprisingly bad.
It wasn't bad. It just didn't perform at the level we wanted it to.
Right, and it was surprising as to how short it came. Is more what I'm trying to say. Like, I thought, okay, it's fine. The aggressive decks are going to tap out, play the guys. You get in, it's 3/3 for 3. That's fine. And it just never felt that good. Like, it felt worse than a 3/3 for 3.
I don't know about that. I just think that vanilla 3/3s for 3 in Magic these days don't get the job done. If this was 2009 and we had, Call the Herds running around,
sure,
Chimeric Idol I think would be a lot better. Now, yes, this has the Wrath Dodger effect and it can go in any deck kind of thing. It's just on the outside looking in, and it could come back. I don't think Chimeric Idol is so bad we'll never see it again.
No, I think that it could certainly make its way back in. So most of our brief shout out to Apocryphite.
I like to call this the Jesus artifact.
I like to call it really good, and I'll play it in anything.
That's weird. I think there's aggressive. I think aggro decks do not want Apocryphite. I think Jesus plays best in the slow control decks.
Very rarely. If I have a deck that does not want Apocryphite, that deck is so good that I'm pretty stoked.
Are you telling me that mono red? You want Apocryphite in mono red?
If I don't have a very, very good mono red deck, I will take Apocryphite and play it.
Okay, you're probably not winning a lot of games there.
I love this card.
So in the aggressive decks, it's real simple. In the aggressive decks, that is a 1/1 unblockable creature for 2 mana.
Yeah. Slap a Bud Splitter on that bad boy.
Okay.
Shotoblast it. There you go. Live that dream.
I'm starting to realize why you don't have spectacular winning records. I love Apocryphite. I think it's spectacular in control. Your opponent has to block it, and then 3 days later he rises again and he's huge.
Yeah. I mean, I just really like Apocryphite.
Something like Eldrazi Monument, not good. Yes, Eldrazi Monument is on the outside looking in. We've talked recently about looking more into token generation. We brought back token generation. We brought back opposition recently, and that's kind of brought up the conversation again about more token generation. I think you're probably going to see us including Awakening Zone in the near future, and if more cards like that start to come around and show their worth outside of places like opposition, I could see putting Eldrazi Monument in the cube.
I really look at Eldrazi Monument as kind of like the faux overrun. It's actually more like Dance of Shadows from Kamigawa.
Wow, going deep. I was going to look at it as kind of like the new school wonder.
Well,
because it gives your guys flying,
yeah,
and a lot of the aggro matches.
But I mean, a lot of times you just play it, turn all your guys' highways, win the game. Very, very. It feels like you just jump your team and crash for 1,000,000. You're not using Eldrazi Monument to grind out the victory. The sacrifice effect on it actually doesn't even come into play all that often.
So it's literally just a 5-mana colorless overrun?
That's kind of how I look at it, yeah.
And I think when I look at it like that, I look at it too much like those are scenarios where I'm already winning or have won. I don't need this card.
Right.
Porcelain Legionnaire and Spine Thopter would be counted under their colored components the way we currently run it.
Porcelain Legionnaire is in white. Spine Thopter is not in cube at the moment.
A future iteration of Phyrexia mana spells could be moved over to artifacts just to free up room. Initially, yes. Well, we have a very traditionalized list in the way that if it's an artifact, it's listed under the artifacts. I know that with a lot of people, they don't break down their cubes like that. I know that when you go to blue section, you count Shellock Isle as a blue card. And you count Vedalken Shackles as a blue card, and that counts against your cards. I actually kind of like the ability to kind of blend and bend the colors, which we talked about when we talked about the multicolor changes for Gate Crash and how the hybrid cards have moved around. So now some of the colors feel like they get extra cards. Mm-hmm. I kind of like that more. I think that actually behooves the artifact section better.
I mean, there's no wrong way to do it.
No, I still have a bit of a traditionalist view where if it's an artifact, it's an artifact.
Yeah, that's fine.
A banana's a banana is a banana kind of thing. Such as Spellskite isn't in blue decks all that often. Spellskite's in a whole bunch of stuff all the time because that card's sweet.
Spellskite is sweet.
So a card like Lingering Souls would just be in the white section because it costs white mana to cast. The black could often be a bonus. And there have been plenty of decks where I've cast Lingering Souls for white and 2 and then never had the opportunity to flash it black because it didn't have black, and it's been fine.
So, we've got the obvious hits. Worm Coil Engine, Solemn Simulacrum is very good.
I think the only questionable artifact creature we run would be Platinum Angel. And that's just kind of like a nostalgia thing where it's like you've got Platy Greaves, you've got Platinum Angel just in general. I remember when this card was first spoiled, it was just so cool, and I really like those things.
One thing I think that if I had to put any of these, not that I'm saying like we need to cut an artifact creature, but I think one of the ones that's closer to the chopping block than the others is Triskelion.
What?
Just because like it hasn't aged well.
I think that guy's a fine wine. Corpse Dancing that guy is so hot. Gavany Townshipping that guy is so reasonable.
So slow. Blightsteel is there primarily for Tinker
and Oath
and Tooth and Nail, I guess.
Yeah, all of those things make Blightsteel Colossus. I think you want a Colossus. It could even be Darksteel if you just like that kind of old school thing. But
you want like the one giant guy.
Yeah, that's his home. There you go.
I mean Juggernaut, Lodestone Golem.
You can get it back with Revelark. How did I forget about that?
Oh,
you can get Triskelion back with Revelark.
Yeah,
gross.
Yeah.
All right. That's a 700.
Mirror Battlesphere is insane. In case anyone has not.
Yeah, they know it.
Yeah.
Our audience is not Riri's.
Duplicate also sweet. Another card.
Duplicate is huge. I felt like
another card you can get back from Revelark.
Yes, I felt like we were strangely ahead of the curve with Duplicate. I think he was in my initial list forever and a day ago.
Well, I think we just fell in love with that card from Constructed.
True.
True. And then it just got ported over.
Let's go over to the last row and is the most hodgepodged row of them all. But why not Revoker? As in Phyrexian Revoker? He's been in and out from time to time. I think that he's just so narrow too often.
He's been in a lot, and then he comes out, and he goes in, and he goes out.
Oh, I guess we're being sent back to the creature side. Okay. What about the Masticores? Here's the thing about the Masticores. Molten Tail, you don't always have guys in your yard, and he costs more mana to activate. Razormane Masticore, we actually brought him back up recently because we're looking for more creatures to have positive interactions with Wildfire.
5 toughness is pretty relevant.
For less than 6 mana.
Yes.
If you can find creatures with 5 toughness, 5 or more toughness for 5 or less mana.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. It's not like a wall or like Ancients of Yavimaya.
Goblin Machinist was my vote.
Thank you.
Look that one up.
So the thing about the Masticores was, as the cube became powered, as it became larger, creatures that dealt with creatures that had a discard a card every upkeep clause became less exciting, and as creatures got better in general, the Masticore type effect was getting outclassed. And I think a really good example of that was, you saw Molten Steel Masticore get printed, Molten Tail Masticore, not Molten Steel Dragon, Molten Tail Masticore get printed, and it literally went nowhere in Magic. And we held
so good at first. You're like, it goes to the face.
Yeah, finally it goes to the face. But you have to that guy is a really aggressive eater, and the thing that makes the Masticore in Magic's history really good is that it takes excessive amounts of mana and machine guns creatures. It doesn't die to a lot of stuff, and it's a clock on its own.
That said, all 3 of the Masticores, I think at this point are. I would not say that they are underperforming to the point where none of them should be in, but I am not particularly thrilled with any of them.
So, Classic Masticore, in my heart, holds out not just for nostalgia, but it's really an excellent green card or blue card, in that it's able to do things for those decks and those colors that you still can't do in Magic. And if you're playing a blue deck, you can't feed Molten Tail Masticore. And if you're playing against another creature light deck, Razormane Masticore can be a bit of a liability. But again, recent discussions have brought Razormane Masticore back up again. And there's nothing grosser than having a Razormane Masticore and having your opponent have no creatures on the board with less than 4 toughness. And it's like you're discarding a card every turn to hopefully get in for 5. That's awkward. Everflowing Chalice on the outside looking in as far as mana accelerants. I think we could probably cut Worn Power Stone for that card and it would be okay. It's not a guarantee one way or the other. I think the thing about Chalice is it's either a poor man's Mind Stone or it's just getting kicked for 1,000,000 when your green deck already doesn't have anything to do, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay.
I agree. It's okay. I have nothing against Everflowing Chalice. I just don't think it's in the top of...
It does not excite me.
Yep. So that's my soliloquy to the Master Cores. I could see bringing Razormane back. I could not see bringing Molten Tail back anytime soon. And I might be able to see a world where Last Master Core finally bites the bullet, but I fist pump every time that guy hits the board these days, and he definitely can still win games, especially in a blue deck, without Tolarian Academy. I think that Agaea's Cradle will make this card go a really long way. Also having, Basalt Monolith, Thran Dynamo, all of a sudden, again, he's just Machine Gun Master Core. And I think that players of today playing Magic that haven't been playing Constructed for 14 years maybe have a harder time evaluating this card and knowing when to cast it. It's not really like, oh, it's a 4/4 for 4. I lay it on turn 4 and it's good.
Yeah.
It's not like that.
So...
Perilous Mirror is also reasonable.
Perilous Mirror is fine.
That's a totally okay card.
The thing about the artifact creature section is there's a million... You can go a million different ways with it, and there's a million guys who could be okay.
I don't know. They're all like middle of the road at best. I mean, too many times Perilous Mirror is just like Apocryphite, where it attacks for 1 8 times, and then the game ends.
Yeah. So, alright. The utility section, which might as well be called miscellaneous or something.
Where to begin?
The junk drawer of artifacts.
I think that we can kind of... I mean,
just start alphabetically?
No, I think you... I mean, when we talk about stuff that's not obvious... Well, I mean, with artifacts, very few things are obvious.
Clearwater Goblet is not obvious.
A Clearwater Goblet is not obvious. There's a lot of people that don't know what that card does.
This card...
You used to love this card, Eck.
Yeah, in the Wiki Wild West.
Wiki Wild.
I think that it's Day in the Sun. Ha 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 ha. Sunburst joke.
Oh, there we go.
Has come and gone. 1 out of 10 times it'll get played and be good, and
another 1 out of 10 times it will get played and is bad.
Yeah, and the rest of the times it'll just be sitting in the getting dust in the sideboard.
I have definitely Clearwater Gobleted for 2.
It's not thrilling. Although, however, it is a combo with the next card in the list, Contagion Class.
We could roll back to Goblet.
Oh, come on. You want to talk more about Clearwater Goblet?
Well, we have to either defend or explain why it's leaving, or we can at least give it a little bit of history here. Obviously, in the day of 5-color dragons, there were so many 5-color decks that this card was gain 5 life every turn. Nowadays, in my mind, it holds its own. Similarly to where there's all this suicide black and you're paying life to do things, Goblet can not only be a fog effect for a lot of your opponent's pressure, but also gain you valuable life to then turn into other resources later.
You know what Clearwater Goblet kind of feels like to me? Like Milton from Office Space, where they fired him and nobody told him and he just kept showing up for work.
That's what you consider Clearwater Goblet be the
I think
Milton of Cube?
Like, this card got cut and nobody told it and it's still showing up for work. He had been collecting a paycheck or whatever. I feel like...
So are you implying the Clearwater Goblet doesn't actually do anything?
I'm implying that I'm amazed to this day that it has been in as long as it has. So this is one of the cards that I would have thought got cut from, the days of the 5-color dragons kind of going by the wayside. I feel this would have been packaged in with all the other stuff that we changed at that time.
I could definitely see if there was a changing of the guard in Cube that this card could have been one of the ones that was more or less removed at that time.
It's like it just got skipped.
Now, it's funny is, Lewis, who is often an aggressive and/or Boros drafter, is very clear to point out that it is difficult to overcome Goblet for 4 or 5.
That's absolutely true. But very few decks are going to be able to do that, A. And B, you don't gain anything unless you untap with it. And there are going to be decks that either are going to kill you if you tap out for a 5-mana artifact that doesn't do anything, or, can destroy it right away, and then, that's just the most, punch-in-the-stomach feeling ever. And, it's certainly okay. It feels like this is such a blatantly 5-color card that doesn't really seem to exist nearly as much in Cube anymore. It's like we cut All Sun's Dawn.
That's a different animal. All Sun's Dawn is a very different animal from Clearwater Goblet.
They feel like they function very similarly.
Then you're playing one of them wrong. I'm not sure which one. So, Yes, it was a lot better with signets.
That's true.
Maybe Clearwater Goblet is a relic of a prior time. But even casting it for 3, which is very reasonable in a lot of control decks you're going to have, maybe if we change up the way the lands work, this card becomes less relevant. But you're able to find another color of mana off of Vivid Land, off of a bounce land that only touched one side, off of a dual land that dual land that touched one side. A lot of times, that even gaining 3 life a turn without really blinking has been good for those control decks. It could end up being too slow as Magic continues to progress towards the more aggressive, but I've yet to put this guy out to pasture. Now, looking alphabetically here, I think the next thing I want to go to, yes, it is. It's only 77 cents.
What a bargain.
Yeah. One of the next thing I want to go to is kind of the Trinket Mage package. So that way we can touch on cards not only like Brittle Effigy, which is a bit questioning, but also like Engineered Explosives, which kind of raises a similar Sunburst question where it's like, well, how is Sunburst good in your cube? Is Inventor's Journal better? Meh. It's so hard to win with a bunch of cards in your hand. You're not doing anything. I don't know.
So the Trinket Mage plan, so to speak, recently made its triumphant return. It was in for a while, then it got cut, and then we slowly decided to add it back in. So with Trinket Mage, Trinket Mage brings friends in the form of, now the door opens wide for 0 and 1 mana artifacts that you would traditionally say, oh, this is just a little not good enough, or maybe it's too narrow, or there's not room. When Trinket Mage comes in, all of a sudden those cards kind of just shoot up a couple percentage points to the point where they can make it in.
And I think we only clearly added 3 artifacts because we added Trinket Mage. I think those cards were Brittle Effigy, Engineered Explosives, and Nile Spellbomb. And again, you want to be able to evaluate any of these cards in a vacuum, and you want them to be good on their own. And a card like Engineered Explosives is one of those ones that's really hemmed and hawed over the years, where it's like, oh, tokens are really good, anyone can play this. Oh, 5 color is really bad, it doesn't do enough. Oh, it's like a really awkward 1-for-1 all the time.
I'm a fan of Engineered Explosives because, yes, you can blow up tokens with it for 2 mana, and that's good. You can a lot of times hit a random 1 or 2 things. Occasionally it's going to be a big blowout. But also, when you have Engineered Explosives, all of a sudden it rewards you for taking incidental mana fixing. Like in the topic, when we were talking earlier about the second pack that we looked at, and how I was talking about, like, if I'm a base 1 color deck, I will take that color and anything else mana fixing on the off chance I have something to splash for it. And like Engineered Explosives is a great example. Like, you can be a base white deck, but all of a sudden now you have a Savannah and a Tundra, and Engineered Explosive gets a lot better because of that.
They're definitely extended of old before modern that would take advantage of that kind of strategy for Engineered Explosives. But I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, is this strictly a sideboard card? Now, when you're that white control deck and you pick up an Engineered Explosives, is it like, oh, I didn't get enough of the fixing to main deck it, I'll throw it in the sideboard, and if I end up playing against tokens or whatever, or like a 1 card I can't really deal with, then maybe I'll bring it in kind of thing. And that's what we're trying to stay away from. We don't want that.
Yeah, I mean, I usually start this. I mean, outside of aggressive. If I'm any kind of control deck, I will usually start Engineered Explosives unless I'm like monocolored or have very little fixing. I really like it. You get bonus value out of anything that taps for any color. Stuff like Chromatic Lantern obviously is insane with Engineered Explosives, or Coalition Relic. A lot of times, when you charge, especially like being able to make 2 different colors of mana that you can't make otherwise, like you can go right up to 4 with it a lot of times, and that's good. Being able to search for it's good. It keeps token X in check, and it does just enough on its own, and it plays well with a lot of other things. That I think that it's a fine inclusion.
Yeah. I mean, and again, it's one of those cards that in and out over time, and I think as token strategies get better, and more aggressive things get better, we only need it for 1 or 2 colors. That's where it's really good. Other
1 mana platinum hits include Ivory Tower.
Yeah, so we have the Ivory Tower Zern Orb package, as I like to call it. Now we actually we touched on these without really thinking about it earlier in the cast. And so, yes, Necropotence, Bargain, they're back. Those cards love Zern Orb, they love Ivory Tower. The question really is can they do anything else? Because we don't want cards to be too narrow. And from the experience that we've had so far, including them, Zeranorb has been surprisingly exciting.
I will say that of the two, if you had made me put money on which of these would have the last longer bet between Ivory Tower and Zeranorb, I would have put my money on Ivory Tower and I would have lost.
Yeah,
I feel like Zeranorb has kind of earned its keep much more than Ivory Tower has. Like I could reasonably see it cutting Ivory Tower tomorrow if we had to, and I would rather keep Zeranorb.
Lewis points out in the chat just recently. Lewis and he was like Rug, and I was Boros, and we were literally racing, but he had Orb, and I was about to get banged by it. Rip Zealous Conscripts, steal his Orb, sack my 8 lands.
In the race.
Bash him. I end up losing that game, but that's only because I am bad at math. I think that I could have done it slightly different, and it would have been very good.
I think that, Zeranorb is the one that...
There's good balance there, yes. Zeranorb, Ivory Tower are good against red decks in a vacuum. Red has more artifact destruction than black or blue, let's say.
Also, red has the land destruction element that really makes the gaining life with your lands more painful.
Yeah, there's a great interplay between Zeranorb and the red decks, and it somehow worked out to be a really great card that I was just hoping wouldn't be too narrow when we included it, and now I'm a big fan of it.
I think it's fine. I mean, I certainly don't think it's like a super high pick, but I think that it always will find a home in a draft.
I've been taking it higher recently as I've learned that it's just great in race circumstances and great for control decks to kind of more or less fog. Ivory Tower is one of those cards, alternatively, that was really good, I think, back in like 09, 010, when there was a lot more control. I can definitely remember like Moat Ivory Tower games that I would win a lot.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be great games, but those things happened.
Another thing I want to touch on that the chat had mentioned was cards like Sphere of Resistance.
Sphere of Resistance.
So Sphere of Resistance is part of kind of the package deal. Sphere of Resistance, Lodestone Golem, Thalia. We're currently running Glow Rider.
Eck is not a fan of Glow Rider. That's a conversation for another time.
Yeah. So there's a lot of kind of these, the Sphere effects. And it's really... we'd been running Lodestone Golem for a while, and Thalia kind of came in, and then we're like, well, why don't we just go all the way with it and at least try it? So kind of, they get better the more of them you have. And I think Sphere is a function of that.
Yes, now, you obviously want them to be okay on their own, and Sphere has been surprisingly the best by itself. I mean, Lodestone Golem has a body attached to it. You don't really need to sell anyone on that card.
Thalia is also very good.
Yeah, the ones that have bodies attached to them, I think, are fine cards on their own. But Sphere, since it costs 2, there's a lot of times where you'll have a 1-drop, you'll have a 2-drop, and either turn 3 you'll decide to Sphere it up, or you'll have a 3-drop, and then turn 4 you can kind of go like another 2-drop, Sphere it up. And when you're on the play in a lot of these circumstances, all the slow decks, all the control decks, especially ones that like had plans kind of like hashed out, all of a sudden have to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
And you can kind of close the game out without actually knowing it while you're playing. Your opponent is just like cursing inside their head that they've lost.
I've definitely had a game like that recently where I was the control deck and he was aggressive, and I kind of was sculpting this plan of like, okay, on my turn I'm going to cast these 2 spells, and then I'm going to do this, and then he played Sphere, and all of a sudden like all the mana math that I had been kind of working towards for several turns just completely fell off, and I just got crushed. It causes such awkward stumbles for a lot of decks.
And that's what makes it kind of a hard card to evaluate when you're looking at it maybe in a vacuum, where you're looking at it for your cube. You're like, well, so what? Or how? Or show me. And even those games you win with Sphere, you don't necessarily have really great proof or evidence in front of you that that's what happened. It was more just kind of like, oh, my opponent didn't play anything and I won. That's weird. Or he just cast a guy and I went through it or around it or over it or whatever. Sphere has been really good. So good that I think we're actually probably considering bringing in Thorn during the next iteration, just because I was afraid Sphere would be too narrow. I was afraid it was going to be left behind. Those aggressive decks really like it. And one of the nice things about our cube being powered, being larger, is I feel like there's a lot more of that kind of spectrum of control to aggro, and there's a lot of room to play in the middle, and Sphere is one of those cards that's really worked out well.
Speaking of another card that is not in a lot of lists that is in ours, is Jinx Choker.
So there's a small list of cards that I'm just convinced Eck does not know how to play. And I think Jinx Choker is in the top 3, because let's say he's in a draft and I'm not in a draft and I'm behind him, and I step 1 convince him to take it. you always find a way to lose with this card. And it's got to be operator error, because it's very good.
I mean, it may be operator error.
It's like, Eck does not know how to play Anka Mishra, Smokestacks, or Jinx Choker.
Apparently.
And at this point in your life, I just tell you, steer clear of them. Because there have been too many times where you've lost with these cards.
You gotta know your strengths. You gotta know your strengths. You gotta know your weaknesses. But
Eck and I literally had a match where the board was like empty, and you cast this card and you lost. Like I just like pumped it up and shipped it back to you, and you're like, oh shit. Let's try to avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, that being said, Jinx Choker is definitely
that's a drink.
An interesting way for the aggressive decks to kind of attack from a different angle. You know, it's a source of damage that can't be Wrath of Godded or Path to Exiled or whatever.
The colorless Sulfuric Vortex is kind of the nomenclature for this card. You do need to know how to use it. It's not as easy to navigate as Sulfuric Vortex. But I think that just kind of comes with experience. I think cards like Jinx Choker and Smokestacks are very powerful, and you just kind of have to know how to use them. And maybe that comes with experience. Maybe that comes with just kind of like stopping and doing some math and knowing, well, what if my opponent just spent their 6 mana putting counters on this and shipping it back to me? Both those things are great.
Another 2 cards that I actually really like are the Shrines. And not even necessarily in purely mono red or mono white. I like them a lot in kind of any deck, almost. Like, Burning Rage especially.
See, I would say the reverse. If I was drafting a blue-green deck and I saw Loyal Legions or Burning Rage, blue-green's maybe different where I want damage. If I'm drafting a deck that's not red or not white and I saw these Shrines, I like the idea of making guys at instant speed and kind of having that slow inevitability that you have with Shrine of Loyal Legions.
I just really like Burning Rage. It's, you know, it's just like looming over the game. Just like, all right, you better deal with this thing or make me blow it, because otherwise it's going to kill you in one shot. Like
it plays a very different role in the non-red decks, as with the red decks, like it ramps up so quickly and your opponent's life total is generally falling that it's like, this is just going to kill you. It's not like watching a clock slowly tick up. It's just more like game.
Yeah.
But both the Shrines act very differently in decks that aren't the respective colors, but they're so good that it's really easy to include them and consider them colorless cards and not, try to... This is one of those circumstances where a lot of people are like, oh, Shrine, it's in my red section.
They're like the Saga block, like Legacy's Allure and all those enchantments.
Legacy's Allure was actually from Tempest. You're thinking of like Midsummer's Revel and
not
Vile Consumption. You know what we're talking about. Those are the enchantments with the verse counters.
Yeah, if you're not playing
Rumbling Crescendo
colors,
and stuff like that.
Right. So if you're not playing red or white for the Shrines, they kind of function like those enchantments. And that being said, obviously they're not the best, but they're still good enough.
Mm-hmm.
What else we got? Tangle Wire.
We've debated about Tangle Wire a lot. I think another aggressive push. This card is very similar to Sphere of Resistance and what I wanted to do. Try to push more aggressive strategies through artifacts has brought Tangle Wire back to the cube. It obviously pairs very well with Sphere, very well with Winter Orb, very well with cards like even Anka Mishra, which I really feel like Anka Mishra is a spectacular cube staple for aggressive decks. Mm-hmm. And even as we're considering adding more fetch lands in the future, cards like Anka Mishra also just become huge. You really want to have access to those cards. I mean, there's a lot of what I consider to be the obvious stuff on there. You've got your Mimic Vats, you've got your Ice Manipulators, your Cursed Scrolls.
I think one thing that we should touch on briefly is not that Chaos Orb is in, but the house rules for Chaos Orb. And I feel like that is an important thing that you have to clarify before adding Chaos Orb to your cube.
Yeah, I think when people sit down, for what felt like a long time, when strangers would sit down at the cube draft, you'd be like, okay, this is how Booster Tutor works, this is how Chaos Orb works, let's play Magic.
Yeah.
Nowadays, it's just, this is how Chaos Orb works. You can rip Chaos Orb if you plan on replacing it with a new near mint beta one, or alpha one, I guess, if you really wanted to, but... unless you're ready to do those things, I would not recommend it.
Or if you can run really fast, I guess.
We're gonna rip it just out the door. I got all your permanents.
We'll deal with this later.
There was a time where I considered putting Chaos Confetti in, actually.
Just keep a stack of them.
I did. I probably do in a box somewhere where I was just like, this could be a thing. And then I was like, well, then we can bring in Blacker Lotuses, and we can just go off the deep end, and like, this is a terrible idea.
Yeah. It's important to make sure your cube drives cost you money every time they run.
Yeah. Chaos Orb is definitely, while it's on the stack, your opponent can move their permanents. Once it has resolved, your opponent cannot move their permanents outside of a fashion of, entering or exiting the red zone, or tapping or untapping. And you just kind of have to keep finding room. Chaos Orb was talked about in episode 3.
We just talked about it in our favorites.
Thank you very much. We had some great stories we talked about there with Chaos Orb. It included some people you've probably heard of from the internets. Check those out.
Let's talk about Memory Jar.
Memory Jar has been a card that's been in and out of the cube a lot. At the end of the day, it's a draw 7 that anyone can play, so it seems really weird not to include. But there have definitely been times where... How big of a table do you play on? That depends on where you are. We've cubed... I mean, I've cubed 3 continents and international waters, and...
Monkey knife fight cubing.
I know. Sometimes you're at a hotel... Or sorry, you're at a airport McDonald's, and you're on a tiny, tiny counter, and someone shows the Chaos Orb, and you're just like, dude, what do you want to hit? Can we please move on with our lives?
Just make it vindicate.
Like, we already are not happy where we are. And then sometimes you're at a GP on day 2.
Oh, you're on a boat, and the boat's moving, and all of a sudden you have... Anyway.
That was a hard day. Memory Jar, we cut it during a time where we felt aggro was really making a push, where we felt like, you're going to tap out for it, not doing anything, similar to like any enchantment. You're going to pass the turn, you're just going to die.
Yeah.
And that was why it left the cube. I think that Memory Jar is in many ways a control card because we don't support Storm. We don't really support a lot of that kind of combo kill that combo cubes have. I think that's a discussion for another day. Where combo cubes want as many draw 7s as you can possibly get. Memory Jar, what it kind of ends up being, is kind of a sweet sub-time walk almost, where you cast it in a circumstance where you can get away with casting it, and then you come back to your next turn, and you make a decision where it's like, do we want to take this sub-time walk now, or do we want to take it later?
When he says we're not a combo cube, it more means we have very little combo, in the sense that we don't have Mind's Desire, we don't have, there's no Storm.
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of combos in the cube. They're just not Storm combos, they're not... I think Storm combos are really what we're trying to get at.
There's no ad nauseum.
Yeah, Combo Cube is its own kind of subset of cube. I mean, we do have Kiki Jiki Pestermite. We do have Zealous Conscripts Pestermite. We do have...
Very little in the way of, rituals, which are also...
Yeah, I mean, we have like, Palankron, Mirari's Wake, Banefire. Like, there are ways to just end the game on the spot, but they're not, like, Storm combos. So that being said about Memory Jar... It's still a really powerful effect. It's still really cool. It still creates you almost like this sub-time walk, draw 7 effect that's really cool. And for now, it's back in. But it's definitely one of those cards that's kind of come in and out as the cube metagame shifts.
Another card that is not in is Isochron Scepter.
And that is purely because it's just not doing enough.
It's funny. I actually, on Twitter, I saw a question with the MTG Cube hashtag that I just check once a day. And it was like, how many instants, do you need before you feel Isochron Scepter is adequately supported in Cube? And I responded, trick question, Isochron Scepter is never adequate.
It's sad but true. We've definitely tried with Isochron Scepter over the years. It's definitely been in Cube, and it just never has enough targets. I think the last time I saw it in someone's Cube we were playing, I was asking the person who we were playing, I was like, do you really do a lot to try to help this card out? You don't have... I don't remember seeing that many instances in the draft. And he's like, well, instance, what do you mean? Can't you put sorceries on it too? And I was like, no, you can't put sorceries on it. I was like, oh, man, maybe I should cut that card. I'm like, oh, I don't know.
Well, and it's also, in any cube with... especially our cube, we artifacts are a big deal. We try and make artifact destruction relevant. And that's a great way to get yourself blown out by Isochron Scepter. On top of the fact that you don't often have enough targets for it.
But I think that's fair. For all the times that someone wants to go Isochron Scepter Counterspell, they know that they're doing it in a world of Smash to Smithereens, Disenchants, Nature's Claims. I think that, they can be aware of those things. There is a question about Null Rod, why we don't include Null Rod. It's just so reactive. At least with a card like Disenchant, you can hit a bunch of other things, and you want to hit those things, and it feels like it's cool. It can be done at an interactive time in the game. But with Null Rod, you don't make friends with Salad. It's really what it comes down to.
I just feel like, Null Rod is like only going to be good if your opponent is playing an even smaller subset of cards than like when the disenchants are good.
Mm-hmm.
And it's too narrow. Like it would be, it's certainly very powerful, especially if you're going very narrow on that kind of resource denial. But again, it might against certain opponents not do anything, even in the resource denial plan. They might just not have any mana rocks or guys that tap for mana or anything. And all of a sudden, like, Null Rod is just a 2-mana blank.
It's weird to me, like, when I think of Null Rod, I'm always like, oh, I probably want that in the same deck that has Anka Mishra, Tangle Wire, and other guys. Like, I want to, like, play it, tap into my Tangle Wire, turn off their Mind Stone, keep attacking with my Goblin Guide, and that kind of thing. Do you have any advice on buying power? I guess that is relevant to this conversation. I could go on for days about finance. This one's kind of easy, and I think Lewis can back me up on this one. Standard cards really bloat in value a lot, and it can be hard to kind of find the person with power that you want to trade in that moment. But if you play a decent amount of Standard, if you play F&M all the time, it's really easy to kind of accumulate all of these cards that have high value, and then you just need to find a way to kind of squeeze all those things into one. I mean, I think Pack for Power is a bit of a kind of a cheat on the process. Like, sure, you could... That is a concept that's very integral to acquiring power. I just think that, always take advantage of when things are at the height of their season. I think that this goes into a conversation to have in another type of podcast about maximizing your value, and Modern really changes that a lot too now. But that's really the most basic thing. Like, you don't want to just kind of spend out of pocket and be like, here's my $600. You want to be like, I play plenty of Magic. I want to roll these things into something. Individuals will have that less in your area, probably, depending on where you are. Nowadays, with the way online store buy lists work, you can kind of get there in that regard. Great places to go for things like that are cardkingdom.com. Definitely have loved dealing with them and everything that they do, but now I'm just shilling stuff that doesn't need to be shilled at the moment.
Winning the lottery also a good idea.
Sure.
All right, I think we're...
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we want to talk about any other methods in the regard that's in the chat, but those things are real. As far as artifacts goes, we're butting up on our time frame for the end of the day here. What we'll probably do is what we did last week. We'll go back to the drawing board and see if there's anything that we kind of missed or overlooked. We'll go back through that section of the on-deck binders.
If there's anything that the listeners after the fact want us to talk about, email, Twitter, messages in any number of places.
We should really set up a show email. Do we have one of those? I don't think we have one of those.
No, I mean, they can just email me.
Yeah, well,
or message me on Twitch or on Twitter or on, like, every other place. I mean, I get all of them, so...
Oh, where would I want to... So if you were just going to straight up buy power... we have a friend who does a lot of that on eBay, and he's done it to the point where he's kind of seen all of the spectrum of the reals to the fakes to the scams to the otherwise. And surprisingly enough, you can get a lot of protection there, and you have the opportunity to get the best prices there if you are... I'm sure they do. If you are not comfortable with that, and you want a reliable source with a lot of options, again, I feel like a bit of a shill here, but Card Kingdom, I'm very familiar with their systems, and their inventory is really good, and they are not listed on the major kind of pricing networks, but their prices are still competitive, so you have a lot of opportunities to get cards there you wouldn't otherwise. I think CE cards are also great if you want to save some money in that regard. I mean, obviously, there's a big debate about whether or not it's worth spending money on the best proxies ever printed. They've kind of ballooned in value in the last few years, I've noticed, which is a little strange. So, I like CE. I've definitely owned CE over time. I mean, I think when we first made the cube, I had like a CE Berserk and a CE Fast Bond and a CE Mind Twist, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Yeah, they're the best proxies ever.
I would rather have black bordered CE cards completely uncut and just squared off than play with a white border version of anything.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of other people have caught on to that too, so it's almost harder to get them nowadays, and you kind of have to reevaluate.
I think that's why the price has gone up so much.
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's just so many more Magic players now that it's completely different. So yeah, please, Eck, where can people email you your questions?
All right, so anyone, if you would like to get a hold of me, you can leave me messages on Twitch.
I didn't even know you could do that.
Yeah, messages via Twitch. Questions, I answer questions on Twitch. The channel name Ekamon, you can leave me a message, drop me a line to there. At Young Mecha on Twitter, youngmecha@gmail.com. Our contact info is also on the website, ekamon.blogspot.com. You can also reply, I believe, through MTGcast, where this will eventually be uploaded as well.
Yeah, one of the things about us right now is we're kind of spread pretty thin, so there's a lot of places to kind of leave comments or responses, and we try to be real good about getting back to all those locations. For example, let's say there's a land that you would like us to discuss, or there's an artifact you feel we overlooked or didn't give enough credit to, or, again, didn't discuss. You can drop it in any of those comment sections.
YouTube also.
Yeah. I mean, literally, MTGcast, at the Blogspot, on YouTube, on Twitch, at X Twitter, at X email. I'm a little not as good with these things because I'll have a lot of other Cube conversations, but I'll try.
MTG Salvation, my username is Ekamon. You could leave me a private message there. Reddit, my username is Ekamon. You could leave me a message there. MTGO, my username is Ekamon. You could, if I'm online, you could message me there. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of if you want to get a hold of me. So anywhere you drop a line, I check them all regularly. So if you have a question, you have something you want us to talk about, you have any, Cube topics, whatever, you can get them to me. I will, we will talk about them if necessary. I will respond if it's just a quick thing, whatever, and we will incorporate. We want to. Part of the reason of doing this live is to incorporate
the audience,
viewers and the audience with the show. So feel free to. Reply. You can reply to the blog post. You can shoot me an email. You can tweet me. You can leave a message on Twitch. Whatever. Any way you get a hold of me, I will integrate it if it works.
How do you feel about a modern cube? These are great questions to send us. We've already had people asking us about doing kind of more of a Q&A show. I feel like we have a little bit of that with the whole live stream idea. You're chatting at us. We're hopefully answering questions that are relevant to the topics of today because we also have the podcast audience that listen to this after the fact. Thank you, everyone at home or in your car or at work or at school, wherever you do those things. You are the vast majority of our audience, so we love you a lot. Today, props to the East Coast for coming out. We've had bad luck with them in the past, just not showing up. But today, we got over 50 live viewers, which is great. That's kind of what we're shooting for right now in our infancy. So, thank you guys again for coming out. Now, for all of that technical info that's, I'm sure, real important to everyone, and Eck has already pointed out, you can find us currently every week a little behind the times of MTGcast, if that's where you like your feed. You can subscribe to our own RSS feed at ekamon.blogspot.com. We've got some great stuff up there, like the cube list, the skeleton cube list, which came in handy for somebody today on the internet, which we know. You can follow on Twitch. You can follow on YouTube. You can get on the RSS feeds. One of these days, once we've reached maximum capacity for channels, we'll try to bring the conversation to one great place. We don't know where that's going to be yet, because again, we're just trying to get out to as many resources as possible. But for now, all of these things are options. Usually we are later in the day. We're usually at 10 p.m. Pacific time. This time of day might end up actually working better for people on the live side. Obviously, it all goes hand in hand. The better the live conversation is, the better the podcast is going to be for after the fact. Those of you listening to the podcast after the fact, please send your questions and your comments into us. We want to make this an interactive resource. So, we love our cube, but I don't think it's the be-all, end-all of life and cubing, as much as I love it and I love what we do. So please interact there. And not last nor least is the fact that soon the cube will be coming back to MTGO, and Eck has tried to make a promise that he's going to cube draft as much as possible. And we want to bring more resources and things to the show. By that, we have added the beggar please donate buttons to the pages. Anything you can add for us will really help. It goes right back into the show. It allows for more cube drafts. For the MTGO portion, we'd like to get to a way where we can have drafts sponsored by people or things and find a way to make that reciprocated for those people. Still waiting on that stupid situation with our logo and our branding to work out. It's not the party who's doing it for us. He's a great guy. We're going to have something spectacular. We're going to really kind of come out and show a brand soon, which I'm excited about just because this is our passion. This is what we love. But those things aren't free for us either, so we're just looking to make this sustainable by itself so we can be here every week.
I mean, and this will be a more traditional, obviously not on the podcast side, but on the Twitch side, this will be a more traditional streaming channel once MotoCube comes back, because I'm just going to do it while it's up for as much time as I can reasonably do.
One of these days, we're going to line up with kind of the LR clan on MTGO's cubing sessions to be able to do one of those as well. I've cubed with them in the past.
We are like ships in the night with them.
I feel like every Monday when we're available, they kind of send out the response that they aren't going to fire one. And then like some Wednesdays, like when we're actually cube drafting a cube league, they post that they're going to do it.
It's just like we have never been in the same place at the same time. It's like the Clark Kent Superman thing.
So, we're looking for other ways to bring actual Magic playing to the channel when... donate for a green screen and backgrounds. That would be great.
That'd be nice.
One of the things we really want to do if we ever get some funding would be to bring you, live from Cube League to either stream the matches or stream the draft or just maybe do the podcast live from the Cube League. Talk to the players that are there. We could actually find out who's in the lead this week. Mm-hmm. Stefan was in the lead when we brought him in. But I don't even know who's in the lead anymore.
Leaderboard going?
Yeah, get a little leaderboard action, talk about people's decks. I know that there have definitely been people who have been asking, like, if we could post 3-0 deck lists from the week. I think that would be cool. A lot of that stuff would be great. Again, feedback is great. Questions are great. Donate is even greater. But whatever you guys want to interact with us, it's a lot of fun. We'll probably try this again next week on the earlier time frame just because people came out. We'll continue to spread the word. And we'll go from there. So, again, this week...
And next week we'll be back in our regular time slot.
We don't know that. We could be this time. We could be this time.
Maybe.
I don't know. People showed up.
All right, that's true. All right.
People.
All right. I rescind my previous statement.
We're getting like 30 to 40 viewers late at night. Here we got over 50. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Again, if you send in responses to us and let us know what you like, maybe where you live. I think my favorite was a week or two ago. Where we posted something on Salvation, and then within 10 minutes it was, "Hey, can you guys go earlier? I'm on the East Coast. Hey, can you guys go later? I want to watch this in England in the morning." And I was like, well, we're between a rock and a hard place here.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. So, on that note,
we have to get to draft.
Yeah, we gotta go.
That's why we're out of here today. So thanks everyone for listening and or watching and contributing.